Well, good morning, everyone. Neville and committee for putting on this event. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and share a little bit of a, the two previous speakers have talked about pilot projects. And so Michigan, we no longer pilot electronic ID. It's a part of our daily life and has been for 11 years now. And so I'm going to share a little bit of our story about that and how we got there and so forth. So I'm going to go through a few slides here and try to hit through them pretty quickly, but just kind of set the stage of why we did this and went down the road of electronic ID, then get into how we did it, and kind of wrap up with where we are today and some numbers for you with regards to electronic ID in Michigan. So why did we do this, and why did we go down the road of electronic ID? It's this picture that's up on the screen that has gone around the world a few times that really drove that for us, that interaction between cattle and deer. And no, we're not putting the EIDs in to track the deer. That would be nice. But no, we didn't do that. It's because of a disease called bovine tuberculosis. Bovine tuberculosis is a zoonotic disease that has both public health risk and agricultural risk. And when we found bovine tuberculosis in Michigan and found it endemic in our free-ranging white-tailed deer with continuous spillover into our dairy or cattle operations, it not only hurt both our dairy and beef industry, it economically hurt the agriculture in general. And it led to major economic loss to the state for the area where the disease was found. And so it is of utmost importance to us to make sure we're doing our part to address bovine tuberculosis in Michigan. Now, when getting into that and why talk about electronic ID with regards to bovine tuberculosis? Well, we were at one time testing all the cattle herds in Michigan over a 3-year period, so about 1.1 million cattle on 18,000 operations. And so we were doing all that testing with metal tags. Who here in this room can read 10 metal tags in a row correctly all the time? We had huge human error rates of just transposing numbers, and it was never intentional, let alone trying to scrape off the manure and mud and not get hit in the eye by a horn or the nose of a cow or a steer. So we needed to be able to do something where we could do it more efficiently and effectively and with a higher degree of accuracy. So that was a big driver for us to go down with electronic ID. Secondly, we had the federal government saying, you guys got to do something about traceability because you might lose your status or you might not further gain status with regards to bovine tuberculosis. And so that was another thing that speared us forward in saying we got to do something and start doing electronic ID. And then finally the other part is that there are management benefits to having electronic ID. And we're a big dairy state, and so our dairymen have seen huge value in using these from a management standpoint, let alone others for many other purposes. So how did we do this? Well, you don't go into having a conversation about changing the culture and mindset of cattle producers without having a lot of partnership. And this job was done all around partnership. This was not the government doing it on its own. It was all of the livestock sector. As you can look at all the names up there, we were talking about a disease that infects cattle, but you had the pork producers on there and other segments of the livestock industry. And so working together, we sat around the table and put our heads together and came up with a solution of how we were going to do this. So our work group was created back in the early 2000s to implement and figure out how to put electronic ID on the landscape in our cattle industry. We had to stand up a tracking system, and we have done that and been working on continuous refinement of that. And then finally, it was all about communication. A lot of talking, sitting in the coffee shops, getting out to producer meetings, talking in the stockyards, you name it, there was a lot of communication going on. So when we put up this tracking system, this is an example of what a livestock market looks like today, where we have these panel readers, those black mats that it looks like. We have 2 of them in each alleyway to increase our read rate as cattle go through there. And we catch their tags, read those tags as they go through the market. That information goes into this little machine called a Minimux that we then capture all that data And lo and behold, later that evening when we call into it at midnight, it'll give us all the IDs it's read for that day. And so here's that system of collecting all those IDs, and then we import it into our software system, and we can, if we need to, go in and look, where did that animal come from? And so that's how we do our traceability today with our electronic ID and setting up our software. It's very easy. It's done at the speed of commerce. Also, while trying to develop and stand up a statewide electronic identification program, we had to do a lot of communication. We got creative with some of that communication. And I mean, you know, meetings are the traditional way of getting out in the newspapers and magazines, but we also went into and put check stuffers in the producers' checks when they were getting their check from the market, and getting that so that they're seeing it there. There were a lot of different ways of getting brochures and signs out there, and I'll show a few here in a moment. Also did a lot of meetings, and so we partnered here again with MSU Extension, our livestock markets, our livestock commodity groups, and we're out there hitting the road having conversations with anybody and everybody. I mean, sometimes those town hall meetings were a bit contentious, and people would even be so crowded in there hanging in the windows to hear what's going on, but then at the same breath you were wondering, where's the nearest cop in case I am totally cornered, because it was change. But through those conversations and hearing everybody out, we were able to come forward with some solutions. So here's signs of an example of some of the signs we put up in markets. Warning, it's the law, don't unload animals, or effective March 1st, 2007. And that's the key date of when electronic ID became mandatory statewide in Michigan. So we have in the state of Michigan 13 livestock markets that have panel readers in them. Those are our major cattle markets. We also have panel readers in 7 slaughter plants. 2 of those are in Michigan. The other 5 are out of state, where we have most of our processed cattle going to, so we're getting reads from them. So we have set up a system and in the infrastructure to get a high percentage of our cattle read as they're passively as they're going by these readers, without having to take out a hand wand or try to manipulate the animal and read that actual ear tag. So when did this all go into place? Well, it actually started back in 2000 when Michigan was updating our state law called the Animal Industry Act, where we required at that point in time all cattle leaving a premises must have official ID. Well, back in 2000 we were using the bright tags, and so that was the mandate at that point in time. However, in 2004, as the technology came about with electronic ID, is where in northern Michigan, where we're having to deal with bovine tuberculosis, we implemented all cattle in the northern lower peninsula had to have electronic ID for TB testing and all intra-state movement of cattle in Michigan. So then it was later on, a few years later, that we started to fully implement moving statewide as we continue to have our discussions with our work groups on electronic identification. And in 2006, we implemented a plan for electronic ID going statewide. And so by March 1st, 2007, that's when it went into effect. And since then, all cattle leaving a premises in Michigan have to have electronic ID. There is an exception there where we will allow the cattle to go to a livestock market who has an agreement with the state of Michigan where they can be tagged at that point in time if it's safer for the producer to handle those animals at that point in time. So we do allow that as long as they're not crossing a TB zone. They are allowed to do that at a livestock market. So today, and just kind of going through this really quickly, and we could spend a lot more time on this, but really hopefully have some questions, is since 2007, over 5 million RFID tags have been purchased by producers in Michigan. So we have used the low-frequency identification tags. It did start out as a cost-share program where we were helping cover the cost for producers to buy their tags. But very shortly after 2007, funding ran out for that, and so they've been paying on their own for almost 10 years now. And so they've purchased over 5 million since 2007. In our markets and our slaughter plants, we've had over 6 million hits for RFID tags. Why is that number higher? Because we're getting them to hit both at a market and at the slaughter plant. And so you're having animals hit twice in that system. Put that into perspective, Michigan has just around 1.2 million cattle right now, with 425,000 dairy cows in our state milking, and then the rest are made up with the dairy young stock replacement and beef cow calves and feeder cattle. This has allowed us to maintain commerce and has helped return 95% of the state to TB-free status. So did it or did it not impede TB and our ability to move up down the road? I don't know, but that's hindsight. But it has helped us greatly in addressing bovine tuberculosis and being able to demonstrate where the disease is and put in controls to make sure the disease is not leaving the TB area. So along the way, there has, without doubt, been challenges. Technology is always going to be a challenge. It's something we're going to have to constantly deal with as it's constantly evolving and trying to stay up to date with it and maintaining that technology and the infrastructure. And so that is something we do all the time and are continuously doing quality control checks of our equipment at the markets. Staff are doing that on a routine basis, and we're checking our read rates to make sure everything's functioning properly. Communication was a challenge. I think in most states, you will have different levels of adopters. You'll have those early adopters, then you'll have those that come kicking and screaming, and then you have others in between. And so there was a lot of communication that went on, and even communication and thinking about from a religious standpoint and religious rights and how to address that. And those were things in the Amish community that we had to tackle, and we did. And so you just have to sit down and have those conversations. There was issues around initially where in parts of the state it was voluntary, other parts were mandatory, and that ebb and flow and that transition period helped or made communication a bit difficult at that point in time because it wasn't all black and white. But we worked through that, and then eventually it became mandatory. And then finally, you just got to be expecting to deal with the unknown. You just can't anticipate everything. You got to be adaptable, flexible, and willing to change as things change or as things come up. And so I think those are things for anybody, whether it's these pilot projects you're hearing about, to others that are thinking about it back in your home state, or even not just for your own operation. There will be some challenges along the way. However, I think there's a lot of success. There's been benefit from an animal health standpoint. I've talked about bovine tuberculosis. There's a benefit from human and food safety because we can trace animals back to their herd of origin, and we can address a food safety issue if it did arise. So you're looking out for that end consumer and can give some further reassurance that that they are having a safe and wholesome product. And in the end, I mean, that's really what we're trying to do, is make sure we have safe, wholesome product for our consumers. And this was all done while maintaining the speed of commerce. We did not hold up loads and loads of cattle or impede a producer's ability to market their livestock. So that's an overview of Michigan implementing low-frequency identification 11 years ago, and we're still alive and working well. So thank you.